I'm actually opening for the next speaker. Right now we are going to hear about the drivers behind the increased consumer desire for plant-based foods and how to encourage that. Kelly Witwicki is the co-founder of the Sentience Institute, a New York-based think tank researching the most effective strategies to expand humanity's moral circle to include all sentient beings. She previously worked as a director in communications at the Sentience Politics, which focuses on political initiatives. She's also a designer and a web developer, and earned to give at Google, where she was recognized as an outstanding UX software engineer. Kelly volunteered for several animal advocacy organizations, primarily in animal rescue and graphic design, most notably for Direct Action Everywhere. Okay, and with that, I'll hand it over to Kelly Witwicki. Warm round of applause, please. There you go.
Hi, everyone. So most of this talk is going to apply pretty broadly to both plant-based and cell-based foods, because I think a lot of the really key big picture social and psychological factors that are going to be involved in building an animal-free food system are going to be pretty similar whether we're talking about either, but I will dive into a bit of the distinctions there. Nope, that goes both. Okay, cool. So I'm going to just first give an overview of where people are at right now in their values. So in the US at least, a third of people agree that animals deserve the exact same rights as people to be free from harm and exploitation, and nearly half of people say that they support a ban on factory farming or on slaughterhouses. 57% agree that the protection of the environment should be given priority, even at the risk of curbing economic growth, and that's a really big deal for Americans to say. Compared to only about a third saying the reverse. 62% say the government is doing too little to protect the environment, but only 9% say it's doing too much. And 3/4 say that the US should do whatever it takes to protect the environment. And despite all of this, only about 6% of US adults are vegetarian, 3% vegan, and less than 2% actually follow through with the vegan diet. However, in terms of what people are looking forward to and interested in, despite their daily consumer behavior, a large majority of people say that they want society to eat more plant-based foods and are willing to do so themselves. And a majority, though a smaller majority, say the same about cell-based meat, or at least about, quote, real meat from animal cells grown without animal slaughter. And in Massachusetts and California, a very large swath of donors in 2016 and 2018 have voted for new minimum space requirements for farmed animals and for an end to battery cages, for an end to cages entirely, for egg-laying hens. So what I think that this shows us is that there's a really stark contrast between our attitudes towards individual consumer change and our attitudes towards big picture institutional systemic change. And to dive into this a little further, we already know that only 6% of people or less are actually vegetarian, and of course 97% agree that vegetarianism is a personal choice. And yet, about half of these people still say that they support bans on factory farming and even slaughterhouses. So what I think that this means for us is that we need to be focusing on institutional adoption. Our mindset needs to focus more on convincing institutions to replace animal food production with animal-free food production rather than on convincing individuals to replace their personal animal food consumption with animal-free food consumption. And this is pretty well backed up by research in sociology and psychology and from history as well. So social movements previously that have sought to replace a harmful industry have been more successful when they have focused on institutional change than when they focused on individual change. So for instance, the kind of canonical example of this is in the anti-slavery movement a couple hundred years ago. There was a whole push for buying free trade, which is basically fair trade, made goods, but then the abolitionists ended up being nope, that's not working, this is not successful, we just need to focus on the political campaign. And in the environmentalist movement today, I believe that we have seen a lot more success through institutional efforts, political efforts, working with companies, building better technologies than we have by trying to convince individuals to make changes in their daily lives. So basically, demand is not the only way to change supply. Supply can also be addressed directly through product development, through corporate engagement, and through activism and other things. And human psychology also pretty strongly predicts that institutional change will be more effective than trying to change individuals' minds. And this is because people struggle with what is called the collapse of compassion in psychology. So basically, when we face a major issue, an overwhelming issue like factory farming, if the solution that we give people is just their own individual consumer change, then what we're giving them is just a drop in the bucket, basically. But if we give them instead a systemic vision of changing all of society, then they have more opportunity to feel like they can create this bigger change. And focusing on institutions also makes, the institutions, the industry, and maybe society the bad guy rather than ourselves as individuals. And it's really important when building a movement to encourage and build what's called moral outrage, to motivate people to see something through. And it's really hard to be morally outraged at ourselves. It's much easier to be morally outraged at an industry that's doing horrible things to our planet and the animals and to consumers. So what it means to actually drive institutional adoption is not extensive, but some key parts of it are developing these new and better products and building a really robustly positive public perception, focusing on getting these products taken up by food producers and distributors, and working on policy that both phases animal farming out and phases animal-free food production in. And these kinds of policies can be worked on by huge coalitions of groups, animal welfare groups, environmentalist groups, industry groups, labor rights groups. There are a lot of people who can work on these kinds of policies together. So some things that the industry can work on in terms of facilitating institutional adoption are some things to think of. And this is obviously not extensive. There are plenty more people who have plenty more to offer here. But some things that the industry can think of are locations. So for instance, one of our colleagues who's giving a talk tomorrow has found that there is higher acceptance of plant-based and cell-based meat in India and China than in the US. This could mean that these are like high leverage places to do some work in. There are also certain conditions that make some locations really well suited to leading the charge on new food technologies. For instance, nations that have food import dependence and would really benefit from gaining food independence, and maybe who also have centralized governments, say, where they can, if they're into making this change, where they can do that really quickly and pretty easily. So that might make a place like Singapore a really interesting candidate for working on. In terms of marketing, I do think that really the key competitive value of these products, and the reason that most of us are interested in these products, and why I think most of why society in general is going to become interested in these products, is because they represent an end to the unsustainable and very cruel system of factory farming. And I don't think we should shy away from those ethical motivations, and I will go into that a little bit more in a minute. The industry can also work on policy, establishing industry groups that work together on policies that will help the industry grow, and that includes policies that will help aid in public perception, which I will also go into in a second. In terms of advocates who maybe aren't working directly in the industry but want to be able to do something to help this industry, it's our job to basically build the animal-free food movement. We want to mobilize people to share their support for ending factory farming and for building an animal-free food system. We can mobilize people to take political action when it's available, like voting for measures that reform or reduce the scale of the animal farming industry, and writing to government when a decision is being made, for instance, about whether the word meat can be applied to animal-free meat, or supporting politicians who will bring forward legislation that is beneficial to the development of this industry. We can also ask people to participate in the early adoption of these new foods by consuming them and getting their friends and their communities to consume them as well. But I do think that we should frame that consumer action as explicitly taken in the interest of building this animal-free food system, so that people's eyes are on this prize, this systemic prize of building this world where we don't have all of the horrors and the atrocities and all the harms of factory farming anymore, of building this world where we have an animal-free food system. So that they're focusing on that rather than on this kind of framing of individual personal choice. So for instance, a specific thing that I like to advise that we can do to kind of move ourselves away from what a lot of this movement has been working on so far, which is trying to get people to go vegan, reducitarian, whatever. Wherever we used to say something like go vegan, go reducitarian, reduce your intake, whatever, I think it might honestly be better to say something like, let's end animal farming, let's end factory farming, let's build an animal-free food system, try these products and get on board with us building a whole system that is made of these products. So that we can change our food system beyond what we will be capable of through individual consumer demand. So we want to build a very robustly positive public perception of these industries. And I think it can be tempting for some of us to think that, well, these products are just much more efficient. They're just like obviously better, like they have all these obvious benefits. But I don't think that makes them a silver bullet. I think public perception can really affect whether an industry and a new technology is successful, regardless of whether it like actually is a superior product. So I think that negative public perception basically is a greater threat to our industry and to these technologies than like delaying the development of these technologies. So basically we really want to play the long game. Even if we have to make some decisions that are going to develop our technologies more slowly, it's just really important that we do it right and get the public perception right. We can't be seen as, you know, some like new careless capitalist venture who like is resisting regulation. And, you know, especially in food and all of these anxieties that we have around food production, basically we want it to be clear that that is animal ag. Animal ag is being shady and secretive and opportunistic and is being horrible for the planet and consumers and the animals, and we are offering this much better alternative. We are the ones who are like bringing the light, basically. So our public image has to be that we are, that we are transparent, that we care about consumers, while, you know, we are in contrast to the status quo, which doesn't care about consumers, which is doing horrible things to our world and animals and not in line with our values. So it's important, for instance, that we fight protectionist laws that will try to do things like ensure that the word meat can only refer to the carcass of a slaughtered animal, things that could like really inhibit like whether we actually get to you know, get consumers to be able to like try our products out and start building their own vision of this animal-free food system. And for instance, we can offer, when that kind of thing happens, we can offer as an alternative the proactive labeling of our products as, say, not involving the slaughter of animals or whatever it is. And I think this transparency is actually really very important to us because it gives us the opportunity to present our product's key selling point in this really positive light and like prevents us from possibly looking like, you know, some new technology that's just trying to like sneak into the industry. We are instead like, you know, the industry right now, the food industry right now has all these problems and we are the solution, and I think we should be really proud of that and openly proud of that because that is our selling point. And because we are the solution, because we are trying to find a better way to produce food than what we're currently doing, than what like the food industry is currently doing, I think it's just really important that we make sure that people see that, and part of seeing that is us being transparent and us just being very clear about our intentions. So we should also exercise caution with things like patenting and intellectual property protection, so the public doesn't have a reason to misunderstand our motivations as being about things like self-interest when they are this actual global interest in animal welfare and in sustainability. And based on, my notes are too big here. So based on other technologies' experiences, it's really important that we that we do this, that we make sure that we are seen as like the transparent force for good. And when things like safety concerns come up, we don't want to spend a huge amount of time focusing on those, because even if it is like, even if we have the right arguments, talking about it in general can just like increase the salience of the issue. So I want to make sure when we, and this is like something that previous technologies that like have offered safety advantages and have been great have done wrong because people just have anxieties about new tech. So if things like safety concerns are brought to us, I think it's really important that our response focus on how much better our products are. Rather than like, you know, forget trying to give like a technically sound rebuttal, just focus on like, look, these products are like clearly much better than what's happening right now. You kind of just accept what's happening right now because it's happening right now, but what we're doing is better. So basically we really want to play the long game, and that also means taking care with things like acquisitions by big companies. So for some previous technologies that like came out of this place of wanting to help the world, wanting to fix the food system, what ended up happening was that they lost control of the message to big companies, and their industries did not end up succeeding as well as they could have. So if we are, you know, these small, brand new ethical startups who can like, you know, be more transparent than big companies are, and who can control our messaging, and who can talk about animal welfare and talk about the environment in ways that, you know, like Tyson's probably not going to be as willing to talk about cell-based and plant-based foods as like the competitor to like the products that it's already building its industry on, whereas little startups can do that more and can keep that framing tighter. We also want to manage expectations. We want to take it easy on the hype. We don't want to get into a situation where we have some kind of winter where investors primarily decide that they are just like done with this technology, it's not going to work out. So we really want to make sure that we play the long game. These competitive replacements, even in terms of plant-based, might take decades to get to where we want them to be. So we want to make sure that our eye is on the prize of this long game of moving to an animal-free food system. Yeah, and that means just getting it right with our development and getting it right with public perception is just really well worth taking it slow. Even if it feels like there's such an urgent need for this, we really need to make sure that we get it right in the long run. So I think it's very okay for us to take it slow. And of course, there are some differences between how plant-based adoption and cultured meat adoption or cultured food adoption are going to be adopted. So for instance, plant-based foods are more familiar at this time, and probably largely because of that, they also have greater acceptance at this time than cell-based products, and that could easily change when cell-based products come to market. But at any rate, this is an advantage that plant-based foods have now, and this also means that the risk of like hype resulting in some kind of problem for the industry, some kind of winter, is much lower for plant-based food than for cultured products, cell-based products, etc. Because these products are already developed and we're more in a place of trying to refine them and make them better and scale them and make them cheaper than we are in a place of trying to get them to market in the first place. The disadvantage, I think, of plant-based foods right now is that they are going to be less appealing to consumers who have what we call high meat attachment. So basically these people are going to want what they feel is like more real meat, and cell-based meat is going to appeal more to them, but that's fine. When cell-based meat comes along, it can take over that part of the market. I don't think plant-based foods have to worry hugely about that now. So I think, or at least I certainly have a vision of a world without the devastation of factory farms and without the atrocity of slaughterhouses, and I suspect that a lot of people here and a lot of people in this industry share that vision. And I think this is a really beautiful and very powerful vision that a lot of people can get behind, and a lot of people already are behind, even if they're not really mobilized on it yet. And I think if we want to get the world to share that vision and build that animal-free food system with us, we need to share it with them so they can get behind it with us. We don't need to just like be some, other industry doing its own new thing. Like we have this exciting vision. It's not just like some interesting new consumer product. We have this vision of a total change to the world where we don't have factory farms, we don't have slaughterhouses, where everything is safer and better. And I think, that just means if we want to build an animal-free food system, we want to focus on institutional change. We want to focus on building a robustly positive public perception. And I do think we need to explicitly build the movement to end animal farming and build an animal-free food system. That's it.
Wow, thank you. I think we are all on the same page on this, and I just saw all the cameras rising with that last slide of yours. And I think that vision is shared by most. Is there any questions on Kelly's talk? No questions at this point? Oh, there is one over there. Let me just hold the mic for you. Sorry.
Yes, it's Andreas Redl from Terios. I have a question regarding the cell-based meat, basically. What do you think is the yield on food to conversion? What?
There are a lot more people in this room who can answer that question better than I can. Sorry.
Because it looks like the animal-based farming compared to cell-based farming is only the animal welfare, if the yield is the same, but it needs to be better yield.
Sure. I mean, I again don't have the expertise on this. It seems like theoretically, like there are less things that we need to make, so it should at least, over some time scale be, require less resources to use. But again, there are definitely people in this room who can answer that more specifically than I can.
Okay. Any other questions on Kelly's talk? See no arms, no hands raising. Oh, there is one popping up. Yeah.
Yes, hello, thanks. My name is Bart Grobben from the New Milkman. I was just wondering, what do you think about animals for the waste streams? Because there's a lot of waste streams coming from food production. Sometimes it's very nice to have those animals to convert it into high quality food. I would like to have your opinion on
Sorry,
that.
waste streams?
Waste streams. For example, for producing soy milk, there's some stuff coming out, a pulp, a slurry, and it's perfect for a sort of dairy cows. They can really nicely use it for making dairy. Otherwise, it should go, I don't know, on the fields or should go to waste.
That's fine. Sounds like we don't need to use it.
Oh, isn't that a waste?
I mean, we're certainly wasting a lot more by like feeding way more calories than we could just eat ourselves to animals. And I think, you know, importantly, what we also care about is the suffering that these animals experience, and we can like do away with that entirely. It seems like, you know, we can handle a few wasted hulls if that like actually is the case, but that seems like unlikely when, you know, at least in the US, we are raising huge, you know, amounts of crops just to feed 2 animals.
All right. Thanks for your opinion. Not totally agree, but...
Sure.
Agree to disagree, I guess. Okay, any other questions? There's interesting questions coming after this talk. No?
There's one over there.
You see one there? Oh, okay. Okay. Right. So who was this? Sorry? You. Okay. Let me just hold the mic for you.
Yes, I'm Albert Vernooy from Marel. I was still wondering, a few questions. How many of these, how big was the survey you had these things from? How can you explain that meat consumption in the US increased in the last year, while also these figures came out? And do you know that many medicines are coming out and many other products are coming out of killed animals, which maybe you still use as well? The blood diluters are made from animals.
Sorry, I don't think I understood the
The
second
blood
question.
diluters, for example, maybe many people are used from part of animals.
I see.
So it's also a very important part of our life, and our well-being is coming from that. And you are missing out of that. And you say you want the end of animal farming. Why not everything together? Part animal-free, part meat consumption, part combined.
I mean, people can certainly disagree on this, but is this? This might be on the mic working. People can, you know, go ahead and disagree on this, but I'm pretty unhappy with animal farming as it is. There's just a lot of suffering in factory farming, and I think factory farming is just always going to happen so long as there's animal farming. It's just too hard to regulate any kind of system where the animals are going to be happy. And I'm just like not down with that suffering, and I'm not down with those sustainability costs. And you know, that fine, you know, there might be like very slight cost to us, but probably on balance, not really, because like we do also need, you know, to protect our climate. We want to, you know, have a sustainable food system, so the benefits to us actually probably seem even better, and then the benefits to, you know, 300 billion or so animals who are being tortured and killed are like pretty strong. So I'm down with it.
Okay, so I think you pretty much nailed it with your final words. Big applause now for Kelly's talk. Thank you so much. Thank you.